I didn't disappear all at once. I vanished slowly, in ways no one noticed. That's the most dangerous kind of disappearance. The kind where you're still breathing, still answering messages, still showing up to work, but somewhere inside, something essential has already gone quiet. People think disappearance is dramatic. A suitcase. A goodbye note. A slammed door. For me, it was none of that. It was silence accumulating over years, like dust in an unused room. If you're listening to this, you probably think you know how a life falls apart. You imagine one bad decision, one catastrophic mistake. But the truth is uglier and more ordinary. My life didn't break. It settled. It became acceptable. Comfortable. Predictable. And that's when I started losing myself. I used to believe that if I followed the rules, things would work out. I wasn't naive. I was disciplined. I did what was expected. I chose stability over risk, reason over desire, safety over truth. Every decision made sense on paper. Each one was defensible. Each one earned approval. And slowly, without noticing, I built a life that looked right but felt completely foreign. People around me said I was lucky. A steady job. A respectable relationship. A routine that worked. No chaos, no scandals, no visible failures. From the outside, my life was something people aim for. Inside, it felt like wearing someone else's clothes every day. They fit well enough, but they were never mine. I remember the exact moment I realized something was wrong. It wasn't dramatic. I was standing in a grocery store, staring at a shelf of identical products, unable to choose. My mind went blank. Not tired. Not confused. Empty. I stood there too long, and someone sighed behind me. I apologized automatically. That's when it hit me, I had become a person who apologizes for existing in someone else's way. That night, I lay in bed next to someone who loved me in the way they knew how. I stared at the ceiling and felt nothing. Not anger. Not sadness. Just absence. That scared me more than pain ever could. Pain means something still matters. Emptiness means you've already started to leave. I told myself it was stress. Everyone is tired. Everyone doubts sometimes. I learned to explain everything away. I became very good at that. Too good. I learned to smile at the right moments, to nod at conversations I wasn't part of anymore. I learned how to be present without being there. The days began to blur. Weeks folded into each other. I stopped remembering details. Meals. Conversations. Small joys. Everything felt pre-recorded. I'd wake up already exhausted, as if I'd spent the night pretending to be myself in my dreams too. I started to envy people who were openly miserable. At least their suffering had a shape. There were moments, brief, inconvenient moments, when the old voice inside me tried to speak. It usually happened late at night, when the world was quiet and I couldn't distract myself anymore. It asked questions I didn't want to answer. Is this it? Is this the life you're going to finish with? Are you proud of the person you've become, or just relieved that no one is disappointed in you? I ignored that voice for a long time. I drowned it in routine, obligations, responsibility. I told myself I was being mature, adult, sensible. Those words are dangerous. They can justify almost any betrayal of self. The truth I didn't want to admit was simple: I was living a life designed to be acceptable, not true. I was performing a role I never consciously chose, but one I kept agreeing to every single day by not refusing it. No one forced me. That's the part that hurts the most. People think regret comes from doing something wrong. Mine came from never doing anything at all. I stayed because leaving would have hurt people. Or so I told myself. I stayed because change is expensive, and comfort is cheap. I stayed because starting over felt selfish. And maybe it was. But staying turned out to be its own kind of cruelty, quieter, slower, but just as destructive. The first crack appeared when I realized I couldn't remember the last time I felt excited about the future. Not anxious. Not afraid. Excited. I could imagine the next 10 years perfectly, and that terrified me. Same mornings. Same conversations. Same version of myself, slowly aging into someone I didn't recognize but would still answer to. I started fantasizing about escape in the smallest ways. Long walks without a destination. Sitting on trains longer than necessary. Staying in the car after arriving, just to delay going inside. These weren't rebellions. They were symptoms. One evening, I caught my reflection in a dark window. I looked older than I should have. Not physically. Emotionally. Like someone who had already said goodbye to something important but hadn't told anyone yet. I realized then that if I didn't do anything, I would eventually disappear completely while still being alive. And no one would even notice, because the version of me they knew would still be there, functioning perfectly. That was the night I made the first decision that didn't make sense on paper. Not a big one. Not yet. Just a quiet promise to myself, I would stop lying, at least internally. I would stop pretending that this life was enough just because it was safe. I didn't know what I would do with that honesty. I only knew I couldn't survive without it. What I didn't understand then was that once you allow yourself to see the truth, you can't unsee it. And that truth doesn't knock politely. It dismantles everything slowly, starting from the inside. This is the story of what happened after that. Of the things I lost. Of the choice I made too late and yet somehow just in time. Once I stopped lying to myself, everything became heavier. Honesty didn't bring relief. It brought weight. Every routine suddenly felt intentional, as if I were actively choosing a life I didn't want. Before, I could hide behind habit. Now each morning felt like a decision I was failing to make. I began noticing how carefully my days were engineered to avoid discomfort. Same alarm. Same route. Same words exchanged with the same people. Predictability wasn't peace, it was anesthesia. And it had worked. Until it didn't. The first thing to break was my patience. Not in obvious ways. I didn't yell or slam doors. I just stopped tolerating my own explanations. Every time I told myself it's not that bad, something inside me responded, quietly but firmly, then why are you so tired all the time? Sleep stopped helping. I'd wake up already overwhelmed, my chest tight for no clear reason. Some mornings I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, negotiating with myself like a stranger. Just get up. Just move. Just don't think. Thinking had become dangerous. I started keeping secrets not from others, but from the version of myself everyone knew. I would take days off without telling anyone why. I'd walk aimlessly through parts of the city I had no reason to be in. I listened to conversations around me, noticing how many people sounded exactly like me, certain, responsible, quietly hollow. What scared me most wasn't the emptiness. It was the realization that I had built my identity around endurance. I was proud of how much I could tolerate. Discomfort. Boredom. Compromise. I wore that like a badge. But endurance without direction is just slow self-erasure. There was a night when everything nearly surfaced. We were sitting together, talking about plans, future plans, said casually, as if they were already agreed upon. I nodded automatically. Then something slipped. A hesitation. A pause too long. They noticed. Are you okay? They asked. I almost told the truth. I felt it rise in my throat, raw and shapeless. Not accusations. Not blame. Just the truth. I don't know who I am anymore, and I'm afraid this life is swallowing me whole. But instead, I smiled. I said I was tired. It was easier. Safer. And in that moment, I understood something crucial. Every time I chose comfort over truth, I was teaching myself that my inner life didn't matter. The guilt came later. Guilt for feeling ungrateful. For wanting more when I already had enough. I told myself that longing was childish, irresponsible. But desire doesn't disappear when you shame it. It goes underground. It rots there. I began to imagine disappearing completely. Not dying. Just leaving. No explanations. No dramatic confrontations. Simply removing myself from the narrative I no longer believed in. The thought was terrifying and intoxicating. For the first time in years, I felt something close to possibility. I tested the idea carefully, like touching a bruise. I asked myself hard questions. If I leave, who gets hurt? If I stay, who disappears? The answers were uncomfortable. Staying would hurt quietly, indefinitely. Leaving would hurt sharply, honestly. The breaking point didn't come during an argument or a crisis. It came during an ordinary afternoon. I was listening to someone describe a future version of me, content, settled, unchanged, and I felt panic surge so violently that I had to excuse myself. I locked myself in a bathroom and stared at my reflection, breathing shallowly, hands shaking. I realized then that my body had already decided what my mind was still debating. I couldn't stay without destroying myself. And I couldn't explain that without sounding selfish or insane. That night, I made a list. Not of reasons to leave, I had plenty. A list of things I would lose if I stayed. Time. Curiosity. Integrity. The chance to meet myself honestly. It was the first list that felt real. I didn't have a plan yet. Just a direction. A way. Not from people, not from responsibility, from a version of myself that had learned to survive instead of live. The days that followed were strangely calm. Once the decision existed, even unfinished, it gave me clarity. I spoke less. I observed more. I began detaching emotionally, not out of cruelty, but necessity. I was already halfway gone. The hardest part wasn't fear. It was grief. Grief for the life that almost made sense. For the person I could have been if almost were enough. I mourned silently, knowing that no one else would understand what was dying. I started preparing in small, invisible ways. Sorting documents. Saving money. Letting go of possessions that anchored me to this version of life. Each small act felt like treason and relief. I knew I couldn't do this halfway. Leaving physically without leaving internally would change nothing. This wasn't about geography. It was about refusal. A refusal to keep participating in my own disappearance. There were moments of doubt. Late nights where I wondered if I was making a mistake. If this emptiness was just part of adulthood. If everyone felt this way and simply endured better than I did. But then I remembered the panic. The bathroom mirror. The certainty in my own eyes. I wasn't running toward happiness. I was running away from suffocation. I didn't tell anyone what I was planning. Not because they wouldn't understand, but because once spoken, the truth would demand immediate action. And I wasn't ready yet. I needed one more thing before I could leave. I needed to decide who I would become when no one was watching anymore. And that decision would cost me everything I thought I was protecting. The last thing I expected was how quiet the leaving would be. No explosion. No confrontation. No cinematic goodbye. Just a morning like any other, except I didn't put things back where they belonged. I left the cup in the sink. The bed unmade. Small signs that something had shifted, though no one would read them that way. People rarely notice absence until it's complete. I remember standing in the doorway for a long time, not because I was unsure, but because I wanted to memorize the feeling of choosing myself while it was still unfamiliar. It felt wrong in the way truth often does, at first sharp, exposed, unprotected by excuses. I didn't leave a note. Not out of cruelty. Out of honesty. Anything I wrote would have softened the truth, shaped it to be easier to accept. And I knew that if I tried to explain, I would talk myself into staying again. Words can betray you like that. The first days after I left felt unreal. I moved through the world like a ghost who had forgotten what they were haunting. No one was waiting for me. No one expected updates or explanations. The freedom was intoxicating and terrifying. Without a role to play, I had no script. Silence followed me everywhere. At night, the doubts returned. Louder now. Was I selfish, irresponsible, delusional? I replayed faces in my mind, imagining the pain I had caused. That guilt didn't disappear just because I left. I carried it with me, heavy and unresolved. But something else traveled with me too, a strange sense of alignment. For the first time in years, my inner life matched my outer actions. I wasn't pretending anymore. And that honesty, even when painful, felt cleaner than the comfort I had abandoned. I had to relearn how to exist. Simple things became unfamiliar. Choosing what to eat, where to go, how to fill a day without obligations dictating its shape. I realized how much of my personality had been a reaction to others' expectations. Alone, stripped of context, I felt frighteningly undefined. There were days I wondered if I had made a catastrophic mistake. Days when loneliness pressed so hard against my chest that I couldn't breathe properly. Days when I missed the predictability of my old life more than I wanted to admit. Stability has a way of masquerading as love. But then there were moments, quiet, fleeting moments that felt like oxygen. Conversations where I didn't filter myself. Mornings where I woke up curious instead of resigned. The simple relief of knowing that if I was unhappy now, it was at least my unhappiness, honestly chosen. I stopped measuring my worth by endurance. I stopped asking how much I could tolerate and started asking what I could become. That shift didn't solve everything, but it changed the direction of my suffering. Pain with purpose hurts differently. I thought about the life I left often. Not with hatred. With grief. There were good things there. Real things. Love that tried its best. Stability that wasn't evil, just insufficient. Leaving didn't mean it was all wrong. It meant it wasn't right for me anymore. That distinction took time to accept. I learned that starting over doesn't feel like rebirth. It feels like amputation. You lose parts of yourself that once kept you alive, even if they were slowly killing you. Healing isn't clean. It's quiet, uneven, and often invisible to others. People sometimes ask if I regret leaving. The question is always asked carefully, as if regret would be the moral verdict on my choice. I never know how to answer, because regret isn't the right word. I regret how long I stayed after I knew. I regret the years I spent negotiating with my own unhappiness instead of listening to it. I regret the damage caused by silence. But leaving itself, no. Leaving was the first honest thing I did in a very long time. What I've learned is this: a life can look right and still be wrong. You can do everything you're supposed to do and still fail yourself completely. And the most dangerous trap isn't failure, it's adequacy. I don't know where this path ends. I don't have a perfect resolution or a triumphant transformation. I'm still learning how to live without hiding. Still learning how to choose without asking permission. Still learning who I am when comfort is no longer the goal. But I am here. Fully. Consciously. No longer disappearing in plain sight. If you're listening to this and feel that quiet panic, that subtle suffocation disguised as normality, don't ignore it. It doesn't mean you're broken. It means something inside you is still alive and asking to be heard. Leaving doesn't always mean walking away from people. Sometimes it means walking away from the version of yourself that learned to survive instead of live. I didn't disappear. I finally arrived.